Welcome to Northlandia, a place to bring you curiosity because here you'll find curiosities. I'm Wyatt Buckner with the Duluth News Tribune, and I will be your guide as we discover the unique and fascinating stories here in the Northland. Here we celebrate the region's distinctive people, places, and history. In this episode, we learn about how an Iron Range priest's passion for polka led to him meeting the Pope. Let's venture forth into Northlandia. Here to introduce us to the man behind Polka Mass in the Northland is News Tribune reporter Teri Cadeau. Teri, welcome back.
Thanks for having me back.
So Teri, as we talked a little bit about before recording the podcast, this is one of the ones where just based off of the two-word description of what your story was about for this week, I was sold. Polka Mass.
Yeah.
Not since the introduction of Peter Tune, a semi-truck pontoon boat, have I been like, okay, I'm sold. All right, let's learn more about this. Like, no further explanation required. But that said, what on earth is Polka Mass?
But yet, further explanation required. So, Polka Mass is exactly what it sounds like. It is a mass done to polka music. So it's traditional liturgy and words that praise God, but done to polka tunes that were popular in Slovenia, Croatia, and Poland, and it came about in the 1970s. It did not originate from the Iron Range, but that is where it grew the most popular. It first was performed in Ohio in 1970, I think 72 in there. And it's kind of like that moment in Back to the Future where Marty starts playing like really hard rock music and everyone in the audience looks at him like, what are you doing? And he's like, sorry, I guess you guys aren't ready for that yet. It was a guess you guys aren't ready for that moment where it wasn't that well received. Like it didn't hit. And then there was an order from the Pope at the time that said, hey, you should start incorporating more music into your services and finding different ways to draw people in using music. And Father Frank Perkovich up on the Iron Range heard that and went, polka, that's the key. And so he took those tunes and he got somebody to set words to them that made sense using the liturgy, and here we are with the Polka Mass.
Mm-hmm. And you actually were able to track down a recording of one of the original recordings.
Yes. Yeah, I talked with a man. So I knew that he did his first, Father Perkovich did his first polka mass and many of his polka masses at the Resurrection Church in Eveleth. And I was like, okay, I wonder, because I did find immediately when I Googled his name that he had unfortunately passed away a couple of years ago now. And I was like, all right, but I bet there's people in Eveleth who knew him and could be willing to talk to him. So I sent an email to the church and said, hey, is there anyone around who could still talk to me about this? And I got in touch with Johnny Snitterich. And he had some masters and recordings of the original Polka Mass from over the years, as well as of one of the 50th anniversary Polka Mass that they just did last May.
And how far back was this recording from?
I want to say it's in 1980s, 1984, I want to say, is when they recorded this one.
Yeah, so here's that recording. All right, so now I've got a taste of the Polka Mass music. What more can you tell me about Father Frank Perkovich? I know like you kind of talked about how the Pope kind of was encouraging the use of music and other creative means to kind of draw people in. But what more can you tell me about how he got involved and how this became a thing?
So he grew up in Chisholm, Minnesota, and he didn't originally plan to become a priest. He was the son of two immigrants, one from Slovenia and one from Croatia. And he kind of grew up with listening to his brother play the accordion and playing these traditional songs in the evenings. That's what they did for fun back in the day. And so he kind of grew up with that in his head, and that's his kind of origin story. And then there's this really great story. I didn't include it in the story version of this because it was kind of hard to explain. But there's this great video documentary about his life where he talks about how he kind of got called into the church because his friend was called to go, thought he was going to go into the church. And a priest said, are the boys ready for me to drive them down to the seminary? And he went, boys? No, just he's good. I guess I'm going. He basically decided he was going to be an optician, but then he's like, nope, I guess this is what I'm meant to do. And he went to church and he went to seminary and he served in a lot of different Iron Range parishes, like literally everywhere. He was in Taconite, he was in Marble at one point. But then obviously in Eveleth is where he came up with got the idea to do the polka masses and did his very first one in 1973.
So before we go further into it, how did you find this story and why talk about it now?
Well, now it's partially because of learning that it was in 2023 was the 50th anniversary of it. I thought that was really fascinating to learn that the very first time that polka mass was played on the Iron Range was in May of 1973. It is definitely something that I grew up hearing about. I have a very vivid memory of like walking downtown Gilbert and passing the Gilbert VFW, and that they had signs about what was going on in the community. And one of the signs would sometimes say polka mass on Sunday. And I was like, okay, I didn't grow up in the Catholic Church. So like to me, I was like, I didn't know what that meant. I was just like, okay.
Like, okay, that's
whatever.
Like normal. Is that just a normal thing?
It's just like a thing that happens. Okay, cool. And it wasn't until I think I brought it up as a possible Northlandia idea before, but then we kind of, I don't know, forgot about it. I kind of pushed it aside. And then it was earlier this year, I was at a dance thing and they started playing polka music and a guy was like, oh, I want a polka. And I'm like, I hate dancing to polka. I do. I like the music. I like listening to it, but the dance is all triple steps and it's awful. Anyone in the dance community knows triple steps are kind of my enemy sometimes. But it was a gentleman who was like, oh, come on, why are young people so against polka these days? And for some reason, my head just went, polka mass. Because I was like, that is a thing that I hadn't thought about in such a long time. And I was like, that could be a thing that would be interesting to look into and find out more about. And yeah, sure enough, it was.
I think it's interesting that being called young people is what triggered it for you.
Yeah. Well, like, and yoga, this is your guys' tradition. This is your heritage. And I was just like, oh, yeah, it kind of is a little bit because I'm from the range and that's what okay. So I decided to dive into this. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. So as my understanding, just gone through your article, it was, even though this is kind of like, the usage of music in church was being encouraged and pushed by the Pope.
Yeah.
Not everyone was as receptive to and like not really in favor of it. I'm not sure if it's because of like, a dislike of polka or like just like thinking like being traditional, like, no, we can't have that in here.
Well, it was mostly because it was the kind of music that was people associated polka music with like beer halls and called it beer hall music. And they're like, that doesn't fit with a church. Like that doesn't make sense. And so literally Father Perkovich had to talk a lot about how any music that lifts your mind and your sights up to God and honors the Father he calls that good church music, or as he would say, beautiful church music. He had a great way of saying beautiful. It was really fun to listen to in all of his interviews and such. Yeah, and so he took that and he decided, I'm gonna take this and I'm gonna take it all the way to see what the pontiff has to say about it. So he sent a letter. He received a reply back. And was invited to go to the Vatican, and he took a group with him, and they played through as a good portion of the polka mass for the Pope. And Pope John Paul II said, "Oh, that's all right. That's good." I don't know exactly what he said. We don't have the quote exactly what but he gave his approval. He said it was okay. There's a great photo I have, and it shows Father Perkovich with the Pope and when he had his audience with him. So he got approval. He got approval from like the most high authority on earth. So
I'm curious where on the scale is the approval was from between him just going, fine.
I think it was a good. I think it was a warm approval.
Or like him like, oh, this is awesome.
I think it was good. I think it was a good approval. I believe that's what he came back. It was like, yes, this is good.
So I could see approval being just like,
you can do it, but don't.
It's fine. I don't see an issue. Or like, whoa, this is cool. I like this. Like foot kind of tapping a little bit.
It's described as a warm reception. I don't know exactly, but yeah, it sounds like he got the approval. He felt like he was confident in it. And then he went through and started making records. He sold multiple records. He went around with the Polka Masters band to different places. Oh yeah, that was the band, and they would take it all the way from like 2 bars. They would play in bars and play the polka mass in different bars and places like that.
Mm-hmm. So it wasn't relegated to just the church halls.
No, but it was still done. They still play it like reverently. It's not something to be. It's not, as one of my interviewees described it, it's not a sideshow. It's not something to be like, oh, look at this fascinating. It's just, this is literally a way of doing a mass, but doing polka, making it a little more receptive for people.
So maybe you might have already touched on this a little bit. Yeah. Just help me understand, like, what about it? I guess, combines the mass element with the polka.
It's literally done as a mass, but with polka tunes. So it's the words that you would be singing normally, hearing a celebrant would be singing, but it's done in a polka tune. Like they literally match popular tunes from like Slovenia and whatever, and they match it to these words that are done as the liturgy of the church.
Gotcha.
Yeah.
Well, I imagine there wasn't much. It couldn't be that much hindrance once you got the Pope's approval.
Yeah.
How are you going to do? Argue with the Pope? Well, I mean, some do, but you're going to have a tougher time at that point.
Yeah, and I mean, it took off. They took it all over the place, mostly in the Midwest. I don't know how far they went, but another group today still plays it and goes places, and they were going to take it all the way to Slovenia, but unfortunately, the year they were scheduled to go there was 2020, so that did not happen.
Yeah, I think we all, no further explanations required there.
Yeah, whenever you hear that, you're like, oh, I know what happened. Okay.
Are there hopes to kind of revive that plan? Or
I don't know about that, but they definitely still get requests for it. In fact, Johnny Snitterich, he said that last year when he organized that 50th anniversary celebration of Polka Mass and Father Perkovich, a lot of people were like, oh, great. Are you going to start doing this regularly? And he was like, no, absolutely not. This was a lot to organize. There was a lot of people who came together for this one-time thing. He doesn't want to necessarily keep it going. But the Singing Slovenes here, a band based in Duluth who does Slovenian music, they do it all over the place, all over the country. They still travel with it and take it out on the road. And I believe there's other places in the country that have like polka festivals where they always include like a polka mass as part of their program. Like there's some places in Wisconsin that I've seen that still do polka masses on like the Sunday of their 3-day polka fest. So
that already kind of answers my next question, but like, can you still attend a polka mass
sure
today?
Can.
And
yeah.
When and where?
Different places. You kind of got to look it up. It's not a regular thing. It's not as common. Like there's no signs in Gilbert anymore saying, hey, polka mass this Sunday. Unfortunately, it's really not as common as it used to be. You kind of got to look for it. But again, those polka fests, that's a great place to look for it. And some other places, keep your eyes out. I'm sure you'll see it.
What was it that kind of stood out to you the most while learning more about this and putting together the story?
Definitely the character of Father Frank Perkovich. He was a unique priest. There are a lot of stories about him, and there's like video of him going out to like bars and having a beer, but then also talking to people and being like, hey, you coming to Mass on Sunday? And people just were warm and so receptive to him, and he did a lot in his community. He did a lot for people. He was just a really, really unique guy he knew people all over the place. Like there are people in Duluth who are like, oh yeah, I remember he was here for like a year or two, but they remember him even though he was based at their church for like a year or two. And all over the Iron Range, it's true with that. And I was like, this is pretty fascinating to hear. And also he had special vestments created for the polka mass. They have so they're the kind of robe looking things that you wear if you're a priest. And so they had an accordion on the back, and they have a musical note with the cross on the front. And I was like, that is pretty unique and pretty fun to see. They had that on display at the Eveleth Heritage Center in Eveleth.
Mm-hmm. So while you're putting together a story and kind of conducting your interviews and learning more about it, the original intention behind this was, by the Pope's encouragement to utilize music to bring people in. Was there much success with that? Did it bring more people in?
Back in the day, yeah, for sure. And Father Perkovich talked a lot about how it brought old people in and young people in and kind of bridged the gap between generations, because people were like, well, this is kind of fascinating. This is kind of different. Has it lasted? Hard to say, but that's true with churches in general. I mean, we're seeing changes in church attendance all over the country. It depends. But yeah, back in the day, for sure. They had a lot of people who would go to these back in the day.
Mm-hmm. And I know you love this question.
Oh yeah.
We were talking about before how much you love having that. It's kind of it feels weird not to have this question at the end. But why do you think it fits so well into Northlandia? Obviously, polka mass immediately catches your attention.
The two words together, they hit your ear and you go, what? What is this? Tell me more. Yeah, that is definitely why. I think it's just fascinating that this thing that exists and that exists in other places, in other regions, kind of was popularized by somebody an hour north from here. I just think that's fascinating that somebody was like, oh, this is great. Let's do this. This is a thing. And stuck to it. And even when he maybe got some criticism for it, was like, nope, we're going to take it to the Pope, see what he says. He likes it. Great. Final word on it then. Mm-hmm. And just thought it was a great idea and ran with it. I think that's pretty unique. Even when his mother, when he first came up, started talking to her about it, was like, oh, son, don't do this. Don't do a polka mass. And eventually she came around on it too. She was like, oh, it's great. It works well. It's well done. it's good. So it's really kind of fun to see and learn so much about.
I mean, I feel like it speaks to I feel there's a lot of interesting things that people don't realize comes from our region that they'd be surprised to learn. I was surprised to learn that pizza rolls came from Duluth. Yeah. I know everyone else seems to know that, but I didn't know that. But no, I think that just adds to the list of things that weird things that are not just native to our region, but have an origin from our area. Well,
and again, invented in Ohio, but popularized in Minnesota.
Correct.
And not just Minnesota, popularized in Northlandia.
All right, Teri. Well, I think we'll wrap it up there. Thanks again so much for joining us.
Thanks for having me.
And thank you for joining us on this venture into Northlandia. To read the article for this week's column, as well as see photos, visit duluthnewstribune.com/topics/Northlandia. You can find all the episodes of Northlandia on Apple, Spotify, or wherever you listen to podcasts. If you enjoyed this episode and would like to support us, consider becoming a subscriber to the Duluth News Tribune at duluthnewstribune.com/subscribe. If you or someone you know has a unique story that you believe can have a place here in Northlandia, let us know by emailing northlandia@duluthnews.com. Join us again next week and discover the extraordinary stories that you just might miss if you're not in the right place at the right time, ready to step off the beaten path with no rush to return, here in Northlandia.